Alright everyone, so new project. We're gonna start by making a bowl from a tree. So right now I'm sitting in what's left of my small tiny apple orchard. Both trees died, so last fall I dropped them, and with this long break we've had, this coronacation if you'll have it, I had my kids help me dig around and we yanked this tree out by the stump. Hopefully in the future, one other project from a tree, we're going to take this stump right about here. I'm going to clean the roots off, and I'm going to pressure wash to get all the junk off of the dirt and stuff. We're going to put that in the lathe and try to make a big bowl. And as far as the log here, what I'm sitting on, one of these days, this little guy here is going to be some Spruce Hollow Woodworks lumber. I'm going to take it to local Sawyer and have him saw it up into some boards for me so we can get that running. For today though, what I have is a piece of one of the branches here where it came off the main trunk, and we're going to attempt to get a bowl or some kind of turned vessel out of this, depending on how much good wood there is on it and how it dried a little bit after it was cut. I noticed there's a few little marks in the bottom, some checks that have started, so we're going to get that in the lathe, get the bark peeled off, and see what we have to work with. So take a little bit, we'll come back for the next part. So what I have here is basically one of the chunks from the top of one of the logs from that tree that I dropped. So we're going to use that to make our bowl tonight. Probably going to take more than tonight. So first thing we need to do, if you had me in class, could we put that on the lathe? Sure. But that bark turns into some shrapnel. We'll have the glasses on, face shield on, but still smacks into the hands. Stuff can fly off. Not only that, bark traps a lot of dirt, grit, things that kind of abrasive that's going to dull the chisels. So best thing to do, I'm going to get that off. Now, I'll take care of that in just a second. Probably going to be using my hatchet, draw knife, just kind of get that cleaned up down to, close to bare wood. So bear with me for a second. We'll get that taken care of, and we'll get back to seeing what we're going to do with this. All right, so I have this section of log cleaned up. There's a couple little bits of bark. This is a little bit uglier than I thought. You can see where there's an outgrowth of a branch on that side. It's pretty well covered up by the bark, but trimmed that up a little bit. We'll see how it actually turns in the lathe. That's going to be a little bit of a tougher spot. So what I need to do next, what my plan is we're going to use one of these wormwood screws. You can see it's fairly coarse thread. It's about 3/8 diameter up here. That's going to mount in my jaw chuck, and what that's going to allow me to do, I can actually, it'll hold that in my jaw chuck, and I can get this roughly round, rough in the outer shape of my bowl. And a lot of times when we do this at school, yeah, we do use the face plate. We have sometimes used that wormwood screw. And basically what I'm going to do is get this round, get my rough outer shape, and then I'm actually going to turn, get the top here. I'm going to turn a foot on here, something I can actually grab in the jaw of that chuck. That way it'll allow me to just kind of physically hold on to this bowl. I know a lot of times people will turn a little bit of a recess in the bottom of the bowl and expand the jaws in there like we did when we were kind of finishing the outer edge of the turkey call the other day. I gripped it from the inside. I'm not the biggest fan of turning the inside of my bowls like that. That's just personal preference, I guess. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take the ruler here. I want to find out where a rough center is. And we're just going to do that real fast. It doesn't, I want it fairly close to on center. And the one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to cheat just a little bit off of center here. It's kind of hard to see, but I have this really weird area, and it probably will give me some really neat grain, but I can see there's a small inclusion or a little crack going in there, just where that branch was. So I'm going to try to cheat a little bit away from that spot in hopes that maybe we can just cut a little bit of that out. Now, the other thing I kind of like to do is just, I'll try to see what size basically I'm going to deal with. And this is another way I can see exactly how much of that, weaker spot I might be dealing with. One thing about this also, this might be a really neat feature to this. I'm not sure yet, so we'll find out here as we work on this. And the one nice thing about using a piece of wood like this is basically junk wood. This is wood that was going to get thrown away or burnt, basically. To buy a bowl blank, you can buy those. We've talked about those in class. They're not the cheapest things to purchase because there's some work in preparing those, and the cost goes up when you deal with thicker wood. So if you've had me for class, we actually do a lot of work with wood that you brought in that people have allowed you to take from firewood piles, or maybe it's burls. So I have just a basic, you can see I marked my center, darkened in that line I scribed there a little bit just to see kind of what I'm dealing with. And to be honest with you, there's not much there. I could actually, some of these edges that are sticking out past that radius, if I need to, I can take a hatchet to a chopping block and just kind of trim that up, which I might even do just to make it a little bit faster on myself once we get it in the lathe. Next thing I do need to do is I'm going to drill a hole on that center point that I have there to allow that coarse screw to fit in there. Now, the one nice thing about this is if you're using one of these wormwood screws, or even a faceplate, since you're going to be screwing it in there, you want to do this where the opening of the bowl is going to be. Just for the simple matter, once you go to hollow out this bowl, you're going to hollow out the hole that you put in there. In fact, once we start doing this, we're actually going to open up this a little bit with a larger diameter spade bit, just to save a little bit of work and time on making this into a rough bowl shape. So bear with me, we'll get this drilled and then we'll go from there. All right, so I put a starter hole in this with just a 1/8 inch drill bit, just so my drill bit tracks correctly. Now, what I did here, that wormwood screw is 3/8 diameter, so I want a 32nd under. That way there would be somewhere for these threads to actually grip. I'm going to run that in there now. And what that's going to let me do, gives a nice tight fit. I might have to throw a wrench on there to drive that in there, but it's going to go down really nice into that block of wood. And those threads, they're coarser thread, they're going to hold it really nice and tight. Now what I'm going to do is, I have a 16mm wrench. I'm just going to wind that down there until I get it fairly close to the bottom. You can see there's like a little flat spot on here. What I'm going to do with this, actually, I'm going to take it over to the lathe. You can see there's notches in the top of that screw. Those are going to lock into the jaw, or the jaws of the chuck I have over there. I'll actually wind this in the rest of the way so that it puts the piece of wood flat against the jaws of the chuck. That way it's as stable, it's going to run as smooth as it can, just being kind of rough cut on the top, having rough sides, and then we'll kind of go from there. All right, so back over at the lathe. Now, I have the piece of this apple wood here. It's ready to go. I did true up a little bit on the edge with a hatchet just to try to knock a little bit of that wood off of there. So it was a little less work once I got on the lathe to make it round. Now I have the jaws closed almost where they need to be to start grabbing this, the head of this screw here. And that actually did a good job. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to put my spindle lock in. I'm going to tighten this up so that it's nice and snug against the jaws. That's just about perfect. Now, let me adjust the camera so you can see a little better. Right now we can turn this. It's off balance. It is locked into the jaws. Not the safest thing. At this stage in the game, we always want to make sure we have that tailstock in there. Last week, basically the only thing we used the tailstock for was to drill for the hole in the bottom of that turkey call. This week, we are going to use it to support the project. So, kind of hard to see, but right here, I still have the drill chuck in my tailstock from our last project. I'm going to take that out. The drill bit's still in it. It's all right. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my live center. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to fit that into the tailstock. It locks in. I'm going to bring the tailstock over. Now, big thing with the tailstock, same as I always tell you in class. If possible, we want to have that tailstock as close to the project as we can. We want to have as little of that spindle coming out of the tailstock as possible. And in this case, that's perfect. There's really not that much sticking out. So I'm going to wind that in, tighten everything down. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of flip that curved tool rest of mine around. It's not ideal, but we'll work on it section by section, I guess. We're going to do the same thing we did with the turkey call. We want to do a spin test. Right off the bat, you can see we're hanging up a little bit. That's not a problem. You can hear right there, that's where that little bit of a branch that was kicking out is. So, that's set up really nice. That'll be a good place to start, just to see how this is actually going to turn. Alright, so, since I got this on the lathe, you can see just how this was cut with the chainsaw. It's a little bit out of parallel with each other. Not a big deal. Lathe can correct that, but it bounces around a lot. It kind of makes the lathe kind of hop a little bit until you get to that point where it's round. So what I'm going to do real quick, we had a video about this a couple weeks ago. I'm going to take my Stanley number 4 and I'm just going to work on the bottom edge where it's slightly out of round, just to kind of true up a little bit of that work surface so that it doesn't wobble as much on me. After we go a little bit, I'm going to check that. This part was pretty good. This is coming in. I just need to take a little bit more. Then this should be a little bit more balanced on here. That looks pretty good to me. Now, last thing. If you do any cleanup on green wood, boards, something round like this with a hand plane, before you put it away, I want to make sure we take it out. You can see a bunch of green wood sitting down in there and underneath the blade. If we leave that in there, it's going to just start rusting in there. So that's pretty well cleaned out now. We can put that back together, ready for next time we're going to use this.